Hello, my name is Sam.
Hey there, I'm Kerri.
And we are the Marriage Guides, and we just have some conversations about things we've learned in marriage that we want to share with you.
Yeah, we're having conversations about our conversations today.
That's right.
Yeah.
One of the statements we've made in the past is not everyone needs to see a therapist, but everyone can benefit from what a therapist sees.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what this is we're just sharing one thing. So today, we wanted to kind of talk about the role defensiveness plays and how that can interfere.
Yeah, I think it was Monday, and this is something you deal with every day. So it's not just one particular client, but Monday after seeing a difficult client, and Sam came in the office, I said, write this down. We got to talk about this because this is important. And just the role that defensiveness plays for us and in our relationships and for ourselves individually.
It's actually, I think, I've actually had couples come in and say that's the issue, is that it's basically every time something gets brought up, it's immediately met and squashed with defensiveness.
Right.
And therefore there's no progress in the relationship. So just things are just frozen. And some people just give up. They just stop trying. And that's a terrible place to be.
Right. Or even the freeze up can then cause another to go into defensive mode as well. So when one person shuts down conversation, then the other one gets reactive to that, and it can also become defensive depending on their stuff.
Yeah.
So we have talked about, especially in conflict, or one of the elements of a relationship that will destroy it is criticism and defensiveness. Right?
Definitely.
And so criticism is language that is attacking, some sort of a critique, a judgment, blaming statement, attacking statement, or question. Doesn't have to be a statement. It's like, what were you thinking?
What were you thinking?
You know, something like that could be very blaming.
Are you wearing that?
Yeah. Yes. So there's so many ways that when we're not careful with our language can come across. And for the majority of the time, if we're doing well in relationship, you can get by on that. I mean, you don't have to be so rigid.
Right.
However, you want to develop the habit of communicating, coming from your own perspective and not using that attacking language. So that's criticism. But defensiveness, we've typically taught in relationships that defensiveness is the attack back. So if someone says something critical, then you get defensive, and that's your defensive response back.
Yeah. So I kind of explain defensiveness as having 4 different modes. And the first is like windshield wipers. It's just basically, no, I didn't do that. No, that's wrong. It wasn't me. So very frustrating. So the point, even if it wasn't brought up correctly, but again, we're talking about defensiveness because sometimes an issue is brought up somewhat successfully and it's still getting defended. It's just swatted to the side and never taken seriously. Which that's another point right there. If the person that's hearing it is making the decision whether or not this is important, it's like a magistrate or a judge to determining whether or not this case meets criteria. You don't want a relationship like that.
No.
If a person has an issue, if there is something is bothering them, then it's legit just because it's bothering them.
That's right. And it's respect in the relationship to hear both sides.
Okay, so windshield wipers. The second is the attack back.
Yes.
It's the, well, you do that too, or you're not so perfect in this area, or throwing up something, back. And it's taking the attack and spinning it back. And some people are really skilled at this.
Right.
Okay? And that becomes incredibly frustrating because it's almost like a grade school.
Well, we see it in our kids.
Right.
I see it in our kids a lot.
Just, we go right back to the playground and we're just throwing insults back and forth. Okay, so that's the throwing the attack back. Again, not onboarding or receiving anything.
That's right.
The third way is what I call it's the implosion.
Right.
Or it's like your self-esteem bubble pops. And all of a sudden, potentially the person is in tears. I'm such a horrible person. Why
are you even with me? Why are we doing this? We should just, or they'll throw up any other things.
Yeah. My visual around this is when Darth Vader with his lightsaber goes through Obi-Wan and he turns into
a puddle of robes.
Just a puddle of robes. And basically that implosion, that crying, and a lot of guys, I'm just going to say this, a lot of guys become incredibly disturbed when their wife cries. And, again, I mean, that's something that some people may need to work through, but that often is that, like, oh, take your hands off and back away. I've done something horrible. But sometimes it's an issue we need to talk about. Okay, so implosion. The last one, the fourth one, to me is the hardest one to pick up on.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's not angry, it's very rational, and it simply starts out typically with, well, I did that because, and it's just this rational explanation of,
Mm-hmm.
well, because this, because that, and typically it winds back to, well, it's because of what you did. Mm-hmm. And so then the end result is whoever is the sucker that brings up an issue finds out that it's their fault. And then I'm telling you, if every conversation of importance ends up with the person bringing up the conversation as it ends up their fault,
yes.
I mean, it's like,
yes,
no
I
fun.
cannot tell you how many times that comes across in our office. And even we have that operating in our own home with all of our family members. And for us, we're just like, just take some responsibility.
Own it!
but it's just like, okay, the whole... I had someone explain this to me. I had someone explain it. It's almost like whenever I work up the courage to bring something up in my marriage, then there's some sort of a loophole that the person goes through, and it ends right back up to being my fault. And I never win. Never win. And then it goes into I'm never good enough. Oftentimes it does.
Yeah.
At least in my office it does.
Yeah. But the winning proposal is probably a problem. Because having a discussion is not about pinning the tail on the donkey. Like, no. I got you, stick it. But it's more about, this is an issue in our marriage that we need to talk about.
Right.
But I think what you're saying is, instead of it necessarily being winning, they just feel like we're always losing.
Right. Right.
And that's the problem.
The piece of understanding defensiveness, and now I'm going to blend something here, but that defensiveness becomes a shield. Right? It becomes, so if I'm hearing a conversation from you and it hits a soft spot for me.
Right.
So the defenses are what come in to protect me from hearing that hurtful, whatever it is, whether I think it's an issue or not. But if it hurt me when he said it, then a defense is most likely going to come up.
Yeah.
And so when I talk back through him, it's talking back through that defense. That's how that works. And it becomes, now I haven't heard him, or what I've heard is through my own lens of hurt. And then it goes back through that. So that's how defenses wreak havoc.
So to just push even deeper in this topic just for a second, the next thing is you could easily take by this conversation that people should just eliminate, chop off, cut off defensiveness. But that's not possible.
No, it's not.
In fact, what we really want to do, I mean, if you really want to grow in your marriage, is you want to understand where is this defensiveness coming from.
Right.
So we've been studying, and we had the opportunity to go to a training on internal family systems, and that really it sparked this. But the idea that defensiveness is actually that person's friend, or that part of them is trying to help them in some way.
Right.
So understanding what got triggered, because now there's a different level of owning. So not only is it, I may need to be able to hear the issue you're bringing up, but I also, the better I can understand why when you bring that up, that gets me so bad that I feel like, because the defensiveness is trying to protect the person.
Right.
Like you're saying, it's
right.
a shield. But when you understand, okay, that's got good intentions, but this thing that had good intentions is now being harmful.
Right.
Right. So at one point in a person's life, they may have been under just constant verbal attack or criticism. We've seen this where there are some relationships where it's just constantly being berated and told they're not good enough.
Sure.
Well, so now that level of shield is about, well, this helps me survive these types of environments.
Sure.
But in your marriage, that thing that used to help you is now an obstacle.
Right.
So, but you can't cut it off. You need to understand it so that then you can take it off, or maybe a better way is just control it. Like, oh, I'm beginning to feel defensive, but I'm gonna you take defensiveness under your arm like a kid, and give it a noogie. I got this, buddy. This is my wife. She's on my team. She's trying to help us. It's you got to tell yourself something different whenever your partner is bringing something up.
Right. Well, and even in conversation like that, Dr. Gottman says that the antidote for defensiveness is taking ownership or taking responsibility. Now, it's not taking responsibility for the argument or 100% of the issue, but I think it's taking your own personal responsibility, like what he was saying. It's just like if something happens, instead of being reactive and defensive, just say, you know what, this is really difficult for me to hear.
It's difficult for me to hear. That's brilliant.
And I don't know how to respond just yet. Can we table this? Can we come back to this? Can we, or if that's what you need, or just saying what's happening for you and say, you know what, just give me a moment. I want to hear what you have to say, and then you lean into understanding, but setting your own judgment aside. But that taking ownership or taking responsibility is about you, because what that does is it reduces tension and allows those kinds of defenses, those kinds of shields to begin to break down. I will tell you, easier said than done.
Definitely easier said than done. But there aren't any shortcuts.
No.
And so some people will try to shortcut it. Well, you're right. You're right. You're right. Yeah. I'm wrong. You're right.
Yes.
Well, that doesn't solve the problem. There's no ownership there. That's a clear way of just, I think it's another windshield wiper, It's just so quick. It doesn't fully.
Right, and what that does, what it ends up producing in relationships, it ends up producing conversations that are unacceptable to have.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't even bring it up again. I've had people in my office, I will not ever bring up that conversation again. Never, ever. And I'm just like...
You don't want that in your marriage.
That's so sad.
That basically says your marriage is that size.
Right.
It will never get any bigger.
And I think that gives the opportunity for bitterness to set in, and resentment and some other roots of things that are really difficult to live with in the long run of your marriage. Yeah.
So I guess, in some ways, you could ask your partner, in what ways do you see me being defensive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe have a conversation about that.
Right.
All right. Thanks for joining us on another conversation about marriage, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.
Bye.